Chris Marshy Marsh. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Paul.
Everybody knew you at school as Marshy. Welcome. It's great to catch up. I know your fellow G1 folks are always excited to tell stories about you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I left a few behind when I left, and I was glad to hear that at least some of them were still told, and maybe hopefully fondly, and
Very fondly. Very
yeah,
fondly.
yeah.
So you are X86, so you didn't actually finish up with us, but you certainly went through a lot of the program with us. So we consider you one of our own now and in the future. So tell us where you are now and what's going on.
Yeah, well, I'll explain first on the X86, maybe.
Yeah.
So
sure.
I left after the graduation, the class of '85.
Mm-hmm.
I had been put on separated, what do they call it, suspended separation, if you remember that.
Yep.
And I was put on that because I traded my uniform away at the Army-Navy game, and my tactical officer saw me leaving the game in a Navy uniform, and that was the beginning of the end. And then ultimately,
that was the start of the slide.
That was the start of the slide, and the slide didn't go that far. They put you on a you have a limit of what you can get for your monthly demerits, and then late that next semester, I took 2 8 and 4s for formations. I had excused myself from accountability by asking my platoon sergeant, say I had to meet my language, the head of the Portuguese department. And he said, fine. But later I'd find out, I remembered maybe, I think they stopped allowing that. I hadn't been informed, so that was one I took. And then there was also a question, I missed a do-snap training. Mick Murray and it was posted for 8:30 in our company, and it actually started at 8. And so it was questionable, and that what happened there, but what happened. So I left. Yeah. I left after the graduation of '85, and then I'll talk about my career. Just years later, it was great. There was a guy named Kevin Moore. I'm not sure if you remember Moose. So Kevin passed away a few years ago. Kevin and I had met up in California, and this is just before the invasion of Iraq. And he said that some of the guys were kind of upset that I had dropped out of touch. And I told him I didn't graduate. I said, I'm not really part of the group. And he said, you went through the hard times with us. We still consider you it, and we're really not happy that you dropped out. So he called George and he called a few other people. I just started getting emails. This is before our 20th. And they're like, no, you're part of the gang. And when I came back, I felt it again, that these are people I went through, a really important part of my life with, and still are. So starting that at our 20th, I'm more in touch with the G1 gang than any of my friends from any part of my life, because those bonds you make in those situations, they last. They last a lot,
Well, they made a great point. I mean, you're 3/4 of the way through that's chopping the hardest part out, right? So you made it a long way in. What was it about swapping the uniforms that was such a terrible offense? I'm not really tracking on why that was a separation offense. Unless there was more to the story.
There is somewhat, and it's only some of what I could get. And okay, so I'll give you so I reached out to my tactical officer actually a month ago. Yeah. Jerry Regnault was one who, I would put me out.
Yeah.
But Jerry was a nice guy, and I'm at the age now where you give people grace. You're like, whatever happened, happened.
Yeah.
And my life became what it was, not because of what Jerry did or what I did. Life happened. So I wrote to him that hope he was doing well, and said, look, things have changed and things have progressed, and I just hoped he was doing really well and that things were fine on my end. And he was super nice. He said, well, I'm really glad to hear you're doing well. And then he said, one thing was just a little, I said, I'm sorry for the role I played in it. And that struck me. And I started playing through things again. I'm like, and there were things that were said then, 40-something years ago, that now as an adult, I'm starting to pick up on.
Right.
And in the end, I could have maybe negotiated a different outcome, but I wouldn't now because life is what it is, and you just never know. You can't go back and reclaim it. So what had
Yeah.
happened on the Army Navy game, as I understand it, that I can show you the first clad board. It said, the trading of the uniform resulted in a television audience seeing a seeing a corps cadets or a corps that were not representing correctly. And what had happened was, I never got the full story on this. In my regimental board, it came up that there was stuff caught on TV. If you remember, of
It
Army
was the
85,
TV coverage that got
it
you.
was TV coverage. If you remember early in that game, something happened with the goat. There was something on the field before, like that, just
Right.
after the march on, march off. Someone went to grab a goat and it got caught. I mean, it was the goat. Their goat was by the sideline. I
Yeah.
forget, that was the first thing, and things got a little dicey, and it wasn't representing well.
Yeah.
So with us, what happened is that I guess I was caught on TV because they were showing a midshipman back in the Corps Cadets, and sometimes we had that depending on but the exchanges, we exchanged them back. But what had happened is that I was thrown into a headlock by one of my classmates and took my hat off and threw it.
Right.
So I will rat him out, which I didn't then. It was Dan
Okay.
Schro.
That's what this podcast is for. All these
Yeah.
years later, to
4
uncover.
years later, it was Dan. And Dan's a really good friend. We, with John Olby and the guys, we'd gone on spring break
Yeah.
together, and Dan was a really good friend. And he was just playing around, and I was just saying, Dan, I just traded my entire uniform away. I need to get that hat back, and we got in a tussle. So I guess that got caught on TV, and I guess it was the deputy comm who was upset about it. So when my board happened, it wasn't just Colonel Sloan. There were a couple of colonels there, which was odd. And this is, of course, 40 years of memory, and I don't remember everything. And I do remember my JAG officer saying that, said you were given the opportunity to have a JAG officer represent you, and you declined. I said, well, I did it. And I said, well, it doesn't sound like you were treated fairly. I said, I wasn't. I said, let me show you this thing that you signed that said you were treated fairly. I had done everything. I had very poor judgment back then. And one thing they had asked me was, who was the cadet who grabbed your hat? And with immature energy, I claimed that was an improper question. They couldn't ask it because it would then have implications for discipline. And that was the definition of an improper question, and I wouldn't answer it.
Okay. So there was a little of that going on.
Yeah. It was like, I go to my young self and I'd tell him to calm down and
Yeah.
So
there was a little lack of regret sprinkled in there.
Right. There was exactly. There was a lack of regret. There was no sign of contrition. There was very almost little respect shown for the process I was going through. And my adult self would go back and say, look, I understand what you're feeling, but you're not doing yourself favors, and you're not really owning up to the process and the system that you think you are. Right. So that's one thing I think that West Point was great, was that, there are lessons I learned there that have served me, both the good ones, but also I found out later that, with changes, I think I had a boss who told me, you rarely learn from your successes because you just always assume that, you're talented and, you deserve it. And you don't question your judgment. You don't question your actions because sometimes you're just lucky that you got through.
Right.
But if you have introspection on your failures, that's where you learn. And said in business especially, you hear all these stories of people that said those failures will probably serve you better, in life. And so what I didn't have at West Point, and it still took me years and years to work on it, judgment, maturity, humility, self-awareness. We all struggle with it, and just long-term perspective. And so for me, I think a lot of us actually struggled. I talked to a lot of other guys that we all thought when we went on that plane, was it July 1st, 1982, that we're all going to be in for a career. There's no end to this.
Yeah.
When they say, hey, look, the guy you're right and the gal you're left, and one of you will not be here when it happens, we're like, yeah, it's not me, it's the other guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, it was me. Um, but then we also think that, the Army is, that things happen as they should. And you've got great people and probably great officers who, they get to a certain point and their career is either rift or it
Yeah.
just doesn't, it's time to go.
Or
And
budgetary restrictions reduces the size of the force,
right.
and many of us left that way. Right, there was no negativity. It was just like we just don't have a room for all of you anymore, so off you go.
Yeah.
Um,
I think our class especially it happened. I think there was one of those financial rifts 5 years
yeah,
in.
after '91, we were all encouraged to go, so it was like a tipping point thing. If you were at all questionable, they were encouraging you to go. So a lot of us went as a result. So yeah, I get you. So, but what a way to go! I mean, if you think about, you know, I mean, academically you were fine, I imagine, and all the other systems were fine, right?
Well, I ended up. Well, actually, it's kind of funny because I struggled at West Point in my plebe year academically because it is just different. I mean,
Sure.
I had good at, I had really good SATs, and I was number one in my class in high school. And
Yeah.
then I, did a face plant plebe year, and it was just, just the. Remember, we took 21 credits, and then you're dealing with
Yeah.
everything else. And I just got my feet under me, probably be a year later. By the time I got to Cal year, I was doing fine. But no,
Faculty fine. Yeah.
I went to STAP.
There were quite a few of us face planting. There was a lot of us face planting. I think we could speak down to the root level, all of us down there.
Well, yeah. Well, I guess the biggest basement I guess for me was going to STAP, and man, I loved everyone at STAP. That was one of my favorite times. My roommate was Mike Endress. Mike
Yeah.
passed away.
Yeah.
What a wonderful human being.
Yeah.
And
Captain Z Rock. You're right on.
yeah, and just to get time to spend with Mike and I loved STAP. I don't know, it was just these are my people. And it was also
Yeah. Yeah.
the pace of the academics that I liked that later I found in college when I later went to Columbia twice. I got my BA there and I got my MBA there. And you're allowed to focus a bit more. So I think STAP actually kind of, which is what it's supposed to. It course corrected me. And next thing I know, I got on with things and did okay academically. But I failed my military rating my last 2 years. Radio had failed me there, and that hit my grade point. And I had other things that I was.
Okay. So and what was that from in terms of the military rating side? Where was that not
Yeah,
landing?
well, the thing is, again, you're talking about a lack of contrition and lack of humility. Is that, and that's why I kind of, well, I actually in the for Jerry Rainio, he was Captain Rainio to us, our tackle officer, and
Yeah.
I told him I just remember in the text I sent him about a month ago, I said, I realized I didn't make your life any easier, and so. And I had done a number of things that, and I learned that talk about learning from things. John Bensavenga had been my roommate and talked to me about this thing that I had done that also Rich Bradford, I think, was my roommate
Uh-huh.
at the time. But what had happened was one of my plebes was very upset. He'd been recruited to play lacrosse, Corps Squad lacrosse. And during
Uh-huh.
the winter, he was convinced by Captain Rainio that he should box for the company intramural team because we had
Yeah.
very poor company ratings. And he was just about crying when I came by. It was on a Sunday night, just before study barracks. And I asked Brace Barber, his roommate, what's going on. He said, Tato has to box for the company. He goes, he doesn't have to do anything. And I said, well, Captain Rainio said that he'd give him a good military rating if he showed some esprit de corps. And there was a way to handle that, and I didn't do it. So what I did was I told Cadet Tetu, I said, I'm going to talk to Captain Rainio on Monday. Don't worry, it's sorted. You're gonna play box lacrosse. And that next Monday, I went into Captain Rainio's office, saluted and said hello, whatever, and then told him that I informed him that I had informed Cadet Tetu that he was going to play box lacrosse and he was not going to box for the company. And I think Rainio was rightfully kind of surprised. First, by the way I
Yeah.
declared it wasn't really appropriate, and then poor judgment. And he said, well, look, I had convinced Tetu to do it. And I said, no, so you basically threatened him. Is the words I used. And this is to my tactical officer. And he said, I
Okay.
didn't threaten him.
Yeah.
I said, I told him he'd be rewarded if he did this. It would be reflected well for him if he played. And I said, well, sir, that's a threat, because the counter of that is, the absence of that is, you get a lower grade. So, but
Yeah.
when I told John Benzavang about that, he just shook his head and he said, that's not how you handle it. This is how you handle it next time. You make no promises to the person you're in charge of. You said, you kind of grandstand it there. You just tell who, the person you'll look into it. And then you go to your commanding officer with a lot of respect.
Yeah.
Give them your perspective. They still have the decision. And if you were to do that reasonably, you're probably going to get the right result. Everybody wins in that situation. But the way I handled it, everybody lost. K2, I don't know what he ended up doing, but if he did, there was a stink about it. And so that was how I was handling myself those days. And I think that later in my career,
well, it certainly planted the seeds of self-awareness, because you're able to look back on it and identify what was happening, right? So
right.
In the end, it was a lesson. There were lessons learned,
But
which is the best outcome, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but you don't get those lessons unless there are consequences, and that's why being kicked out. I mean, and then probably falling down a few other times. I mean, I've had a great career and done great things, but like I said, I learned my lessons when I had to, and try to keep that awareness going forward, and learning more.
Yeah.
But the way that I handled myself as a cadet, and there was a lot of good to it, but the things that I struggled with are things that, luckily, leaving West Point was probably one of the hardest things I ever did.
Yeah, yeah. However, right now you're speaking to us as from an embassy, as a member of the Department of State. So, I mean, a lifetime of service. Here you are. Talk about where you are now, and whatever you can talk about, of course. But what are you doing now? Because you might have one of the more interesting, if not the most interesting, LinkedIn I've seen of classmates in general. So talk about what you're up to now.
Yeah, I probably won't talk about a lot, to be candid.
Yeah,
but
you can.
But what I can talk about is that I've joined the Department of State, and I'm working in Haiti. There is a lot of things going on here on
sure.
Trying to establish a government with a rule of law, and there's gang violence that is going to be suppressed. Things will get kinetic. They're going to
things
get
to do. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and my job here, I really enjoy it a lot. I have a lot to do more with movements and the armored vehicles, and I work a lot, and I work in management along with the regional security. And what I think has served me well is that there's a certain way of communicating and acting within the Department of State that I actually don't do well with, and I recognized it coming in. I tend to appreciate and talk a little bit better with people in the military, law enforcement. So I'm still kind of learning how to manage things. But I love the job I'm doing, the people I support here. It's tragic what's happened. It's been centuries of tragedy for Haiti. But if I'm going to serve the last part of my career before retirement, this is where, I asked specifically to come here, and I was lucky enough to get here. And then George was the one, when I mentioned it to George, hey, I'm going to Haiti. He goes, well, you've got to look up Henry Worcester. He was our classmate when we marched onto the plane back in '82. And he's had a great career. He left, I think it's a little after, that's what George had. I just called George before this call. I think George said he left a little after Beast, and he went to Amherst and Yale and served as a special forces officer for about 15 years. So he's had a different career. For me, it was kind of funny. I've had some regrets. If I were to go back and I'd look, I left West Point. I went 2 years at Columbia, and Luckily,
Okay.
interesting there. I had my thesis advisor, a guy named Roger Hilsman. You can look him up. He was Undersecretary of State under Kennedy. He was a West Point class of 42, 43. He went
Hmm.
OSS, went from Army to OSS during the war. Uh, and he was the most influential professor I had there, and I was very close with him. And when I told him I was going to then enter the Department of State, he said, "Why would you do that?" And I said, "Because I want to work internationally." He goes, "Marshy, you've told me about your experience at West Point. You've been fairly candid about it. I don't see how you worked in that organization, what you think is going to be different in Department of State." And he said, "You don't seem to have worked well in hierarchy. You don't seem to understand it that well. And you don't
Right.
seem to appreciate structure." I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not, this isn't the Army, it's the Department of State." It's like, "Oh, you have no idea, the level of hierarchy here." So he said,
Right.
I would not do that. And that was about what come out. I did talk to them. I did pass my exam. But then when they talked to me about some of the things that I had been up to, I think at that point they thought this is not a person that is probably appropriate for the Department of State. So I went from there into investment banking, where they took people like me. Um, and then 40 years
Where
later,
people with your characteristics are considered heroes.
yeah, and so there's a certain brash, a lack of self awareness, ambition and all that.
You're using the words. I appreciate it.
Uh, so where I didn't even fit. So and again, so my life basically has been Plan B or Plan C. My Plan A's never work out, and I think that might be a lot of people if they really look at what they did. And
Yeah, most
I
of us live Plan B, right? That's for
Yeah, Plan
sure.
B. And
Okay.
my wife says, "Oh, what happened? It was meant to be." And I don't believe that. I do not believe in fate. So if someone says it was meant to be, it wasn't meant to be. However, life tends to be fairly truthful and gets you where you can. The reason you fail is because you cannot do something, and the avenues that open up are things that you can do. So those Plan Bs are
Yeah.
sometimes better suited for you. And so, and when I found out, so I was investment banking in '87. That was, if you remember that, that's when President
Yeah.
Trump published Art of the Deal, and the deal was everything. And
Yeah.
I had a
Yeah.
boss who counseled me, and he said, "Look, you do a great job, but only when I send you to Hong Kong or Japan." I said, "When I staff you on a deal, your eyes kind of roll over because the deal doesn't matter to you. And that's what people are motivated here by the deal. You don't seem to care. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's going to help you." He said, "You should be looking that you want to work internationally." So went back to business school, came out, and then that's when I dropped into entertainment. And then I did entertainment for about 30 something years before I came back into government service.
Yeah. I mean, so Columbia, some investment banking, back to graduate school, and then entertainment. This is why your LinkedIn is astonishing, and a great read. Just your profile. So what was talk a bit about how you dropped into entertainment? What your roles were there? Because
Yeah.
you
So,
went right into the
yeah.
film side of it, right?
Yeah, I went into the movie distribution side of it, and I have friends who moved over to production, and I never really cared to. I knew that I at least had the
Yeah.
self awareness there of what I was good, what I could do well, and it paid off. Um, Really, what happened? I thought I was going to go into communication satellite operations. I had done some satellite deals and was an investment banker, but
Uh huh.
the jobs were getting kind of scarce, and I came near the end of it, and I'm like, I'm just going to apply to anything and don't care what my background is. And so I got a job interview at Columbia Pictures, looking for somebody who was uh, with a media background who was a marketing concentrator. Came out in the interviews that I had neither of those, and was fine for the hiring manager, but the vice president of marketing was just shocked and really not impressed by me. And she said,
Right.
"What makes you think you can do?" She said, You've you're not a marketing concentrator, and you've had no background in media at all." And so what I came up with is that I'd had intro to marketing. That did not impress her. And then it was just basically I'd watched a lot of movies, and I was like, "So that's your qualification?" I'm like, "I guess." And I went to lunch, and it's pretty clear that it was over. This job was the job. Everyone at Columbia Pictures, the media people, everyone wanted
Yeah.
this, and the marketing people, and for them to even know that a management concentrate or even thought that to interview for it. So I get to the president, interview the president, and he just said in time today, he said, look, you've talked to everybody. Let me just walk you to the elevator. And so we're walking the elevator. It's basically over. And he had seen one thing on my resume that was odd and said that I played ice hockey and that I played ice hockey in Manhattan. And he said, where do you do? And I said, there's a rink on the 35th floor. And he, one thing led to another. And I'd paid in the same pond that he had up in Boston. But then we got to talk about the movie Slapshot. And I can't say, Slapshot's a great movie. It's poor production value, but it's just culty and it's a great film. I was like, what do you mean poor production? I said, well, I watch a lot of movies that the production values aren't good, but they're great movies. He said, give me an example. I'm like, well, all the Trauma films. And he said, well, you know that we distribute them. I go, yes, I know. That's why I mentioned it. I've seen them all. And he said, did you recently watch them? I said, no, I've watched them for years. Like this Toxic Avenger. And so just at the very end, before I got in the elevator, he said, wow. He said, look, I've talked to a lot of people here and they're really excited about working on Terminator 2 and, and all these great movies, but I don't need people to market good movies. They market themselves. I need people who can understand bad movies and market bad movies. And next thing I know, I got the offer, and that was the beginning of my career.
Yeah, the back catalog, right? Get the.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
One of my favorites, if you look it up sometime,
Yeah,
Shakes
create that extra revenue out of that. Yeah.
It's a catalog's where you make all your profit, right? And also it's a hit-driven business. So if you get a hit, that actually will drive a lot of things. But especially when you're coming into where we were, back catalog became really, really important. And so I went from Columbia Pictures. I had worked for George Lucas. I was his head of strategy and business development. That was in the lead up to I managed the international distribution of Star Wars Trilogy Special Edition for Lucasfilm, and then also worked on some of the production and finance for the prequels.
So just because our group is probably not going to have the insight into that industry. Yeah. What does it, when you say you worked on distribution, talk about what that would mean.
Yeah. So
talk us through it.
Yeah. So there is that we would negotiate with, they're a producer of a movie, and where George Lucas is different than the rest is he owns the intellectual property. So we have the rights. Mm-hmm. We had everything. We didn't have A New Hope at that point. We were negotiating the rights back. Fox had retained it because, he was a director. He negotiated in order for him to finish the film, he gave up his director's fee and said, look, I want to take the sequel rights. So we're at that point, we're negotiating with distributors. One was Fox. So I worked fairly closely with the guys at Fox. And here, that negotiation is being driven by the president of the company, a guy named Gordon Radley. And I was just the second chair. Right. And then when it came for our plans for them distributing the Star Wars Trilogy Special Edition internationally, I was the point of contact to do the approvals. And that's where I met a guy named Scott Neeson, who was their president at that point, who later we stayed in touch throughout our careers. And then what happened was father had passed away suddenly when we were in the middle of the negotiation for the toy deal, and then we were still negotiating the film deal. Once we closed, the day we closed with Fox, I walked into the office of the president I reported to, and told him I was quitting. And there were some people there who were surprised. He wasn't at all. Gordon has been he said, why? And I said, look, my dad passed away a year ago. I said, yeah. And I said, I was wondering when you were going to get around to this decision. And he knew I was coming in that day, even before I knew. He kind of knew that once this deal's done, this kid's going to go. And so, and there's some other people that really tried to dissuade me, and it was an odd conversation. But I went. And I had other mentors who told me, step off your career. He said, the advice I got is if you're too scared to ever quit your job, you can never succeed because you're never going to do the things you want to do, need to do. So you always have to have that. So I did 2 years, close to 2 years in an NGO in Africa, and then when I came back, I jumped into right back to what I did before. I worked for Warner Brothers for about five
So you were
years.
in California working for Lucasfilms. Is that right?
Yes, up in Northern California. So I lived
Right.
up in Mill Valley,
Yeah.
and then that was up in Lucas Valley, which is where
And so,
the
what
ranch
was the
was.
thinking on the NGO? I mean,
Yeah. So what
you
had
can't just
happened?
glide over that because that's an interesting transition right there, right?
Yeah. So what had happened was I realized, and I talked to my kids about this, about giving yourself a break when you're young and taking the time to figure out where you're going to go. And so I
Yeah.
had jumped straight out of West Point right into Columbia, and like I
Hmm.
have to get moving. And then went out of Columbia, and I said, the job, this investment banking came along, and I just jumped into a business school. And a lot of us do that. And the
Yeah.
concept of like a gap year, it's trying to tell kids, I know you're in a rush in life, but you have so much more freedom now than you will later when you're responsible for a family or you've got other things that your career is dependent upon. You have freedoms now that you need to take advantage of. And I
Yeah.
didn't do that. And I'd woken up, I was thinking my father, when he passed away, I struggled with it. And he also had, kind of was a workaholic. And I'm like, I never stepped off. And I wish I had done like, Peace Corps and NGO earlier. And I realized
Yeah.
I can do this. I'm going to do this. And there's a guy named Phil Kent who used to run CNN. He was the one who told me you always have to be willing to quit your job. Because
Yeah.
just as I'd quit, ESPN came calling, and they asked me to interview for the head of ESPN Asia. And I actually went and took the interview, even after I decided that I was going to, and I would have gotten right back onto the treadmill again. And
The
Phil was like,
treadmill, sure.
yeah, and Phil was like, don't do it. And so I didn't. And I realized, so what happened was he said, what's your plan? I said, I'm going to go there for 6 months. I'm going to do a few projects and come back. And he's like, why are you coming back?
Yeah.
I said, well, that's the plan. And Phil was like, why do you have a plan? You just made the decision to free yourself and you're shackling yourself again. What I would do
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
leave on an open ticket, and you'll just wake up and you'll know when it's time. But he said, no, he said, in business, in life, you have to learn, always leave yourself options. Don't make decisions that constrain you. And if you don't have to, you make
Such great
decisions.
advice,
That's great advice. So he said, you'll
right?
know. So I
At
sent him a
any
postcard.
age, even now, right? Yeah.
What's that?
Even now, that's great advice at this age.
At this age, you have to, because it actually gets kind of scary when we get into retirement. And it's like,
Yeah.
look, he said, just take your time and let things evolve and make a decision when that comes to you. Don't pre-decide
Yeah.
something. Um,
And so you ended up going there for 2 years as a result.
yeah. So what happened? About 6 months later, I sent him a postcard of me with some kids in the Kalahari saying, "Phil, I canceled my ticket. I'll tell you when I come out." And I had the moment. I had the moment that he said, "You'll know within a moment."
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
2 years
Yeah.
later, we're just finishing up some projects. The Dominic O'Neill, is a guy who works for the UN now. I was working for him. He said, "Look, Marsh, I'm leaving Namibia. I'm going to go to Mongolia. I want you to be my guy in the field because you never like to come into field base. You're a field guy. You sleep on the ground." And in that moment, I was like, "Yeah, I'm that guy, but I'm getting into my 30s now. I'm going to be. I've actually kind of gone off already. I'm going to be that weird guy out in the Gobi Desert." And when the
Yeah.
moment I said, "I got to go home," it's kind of like
Yeah.
Forrest Gump when he gets to the end of his run. He's like, just turns around and goes home. He just knows at the moment. So I went back, and that's when I got back into Warner Brothers and got right back into movie distribution. And what was good was I knew this is what I wanted to do. I know this is what I could do, and I had no doubts at that point. Like, oh, what could I have done? I said, no, I had the chance to leave this industry,
Yeah.
and I kind
What's
of
a
realized,
movie we would all know that you distributed? What's the kind of
yeah.
movie that
So
you were
so
involved with?
I worked on everything from the Matrix movies, The Matrix Reloaded,
There you
to
go.
all the pirate movies, and so Pirates of the
Yeah.
Caribbean. Um, and
Yeah.
some of those, and those are always like debates. Like the funny, I was in international. We were making the dubs, and remember they said they canceled out. Said you got two French dubs. So we canceled one because you have no idea of the finance involved in it. And I asked them which one they kept. Said, "Oh, we make this great dub in Canada." I'm like, "You're going to release Pirates of the Caribbean in Quebecois in Paris? They will burn down the
Don't
theaters."
do that.
So uh, I had fun. That's no, even
Don't do that.
the conflicts were fun. And it was funny is I think it was Chris Daring was the international head of international at Columbia
Right.
TriStar. When he said, "Look, I need somebody who does the small movies." It's always the small movies I liked more. Like one I mentioned was Shakes the Clown. It's the alcoholic. It's the like Citizen Kane of alcoholic clown movies. Bobcat Goldthwait.
Which,
Watch,
and that
watch.
was the pitch.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Citizen
Watch it.
Kane plus
You'll,
alcolholic clown movies.
you'll see a
No,
very early
that's going to be a
Adam
hit.
Sandler. He's in clown face. Blank, you'll miss him. He's called Binks the Clown. He's in the back seat, but that's one of his first roles. It's really good. But then I got to work on The Kid Stays in the Picture with Robert Evans, which was weird.
No, you did.
Yeah, Robert Evans is the head of Paramount. Who did the Godfather movies and all that, and so
Yeah.
and really I was
Legendary
assigned
guy,
to
right?
it just because no one wanted. He was older, and it was his pet project, and so that was kind of weird. And that was also Brett Ratner came into a meeting, and that was back when he started to have. Later, he had some issues. So so some of the movies I worked on were the bigger movies like the Pirates of the Caribbean, Matrix Reloaded, Star Wars. Then so later on, so I transitioned to Disney. What happened was is that
Yeah, you went to work for the mouse.
I went to work for the Mouse, and before I got there, I never thought I'd end up at Disney. I thought they were a little too precious, and I wasn't
Yeah.
Hollywood. But we were trying to convince them to go into China and commit to it.
Yeah, that was a big. They're just. We were talking about it ahead of time. You and I were at Disney at the same time.
Yeah,
We
so you
overlapped
remember,
at
you remember
Disney.
those
Right.
years. So when I was
I spent
actually
a lot of time at Disney, right?
I was at the Warner team coming over across because where the Warner lot is, where the Disney lot. You basically walk across the road.
Yeah.
And then I got a call, and this is Bob Chapek, who was the chairman. It was Bob Chapek who would like to talk to you, and so I came over, and I was just a VP at that point. And but later, what had happened was I had taken responsibility for Southeast Asia for the Walt Disney Studios. And what helped me there is I was a fanboy of comic books a long time ago, and one of the weirdest, well, for other people it's a weird meeting. We're meeting with Marvel. Kevin Feige, he came over. He was telling us
I know.
what the movies were. And it was maybe it was C.B. Cebulski who was the head of the comic books, but they were talking about it was Feige. We're in this thing. I'm just backseating it. The head of Walt Disney Company, Southeast Asia, is a guy named Rob Gilby. Rob's chatting with him, and he said, "Look, we've got these 3 films coming up." I had a view that was kind of weird. I didn't really believe that Thor was going to be that good. I was really getting keen on Guardians of the Galaxy, and I was curious about Captain America, the Winter Soldier. So it came up, said, "Well, we've got a different, we've got a new kind of sidekick for Captain America." I'm like, "Yeah, the Winter Soldier." It's like, no, it's not Bucky. It's after that. And my eyes went open. I'm like, "You're kidding me!" And they're like, "Yeah, it's who you think it is." My boss, who wasn't in the comic books, like, "What are you talking about?" I run out of the room, come back a couple minutes later carrying my action figure from the 1970s of Falcon and a comic book. And again, poor judgment. Sometimes it takes me a while to learn presence and self-awareness. So after the senior Marvel guys go and we're sitting there, my boss, Rob, turned to me and goes, "Marsh, don't ever bring your dolls and your comic books into a meeting again. It's really embarrassing." I worked on all the Marvel.
But there was a bit of Disney with that was appreciated being a fan of the product, right? So a lot of that was very much a part of the culture there. So
it works well.
It wasn't that far off.
And we ended up getting the Guardians of the Galaxy. I almost had my team revolt on me because I was sold on it early because I just was getting a sense of comic book fatigue. And Thor, I just told him, I said, like as a kid, some floating Norse god, I just don't know how we keep this thing going. But what happened was, so we brought them in. I was trying to get open films with stars. So we tried to get Robert Downey Jr., but that was about $1.5 million for his entourage. Couldn't afford it. Tom Hiddleston choreographed him. So it's a Guardians of the Galaxy, and which funny. That's where I first met Dave Bautista, who was a wrestler, um,
Mhm.
and then Zoe Saldana. So where Rob and I are at lunch with Zoe Saldana and Dave Bautista um, and James Gunn, the director, and she informs me because I'm kind of managing the premiere that's going to happen the next day. Is way to red carpet. She said I can't be on the red carpet because I haven't announced yet that I'm pregnant with twins. And I said, oh, and then because she just wants to talk about kids, we talk about kids. You have kids, and I said, yeah, I've got two kids, Zoe and and Sam. And she goes, Zoe, why did you name your kid Zoe? And I'm looking at her like, 2010 was when we knew we were having a kid. It was clear that we named our kid after her. So she told James, I'm tired. Can he bring in his kid? So my daughter got to spend an afternoon with Zoe Saldana, and she was like a 3-year old.
You're kidding.
Yeah,
That's
and
terrific.
we have pictures of it, and it's great. And for years, she would refer to her as Zoe Movie Star. I'm named after
Zoe
Zoe
movie
Movie
star.
Star, and she got to meet her. So yeah, so
Oh, that's great.
that was a good times.
Yeah, Disney was good for the lunches. Occasionally, you'd have those kinds of lunches.
Yeah, no, well, for that, and the thing, well, Disney also. I had to tell my friends because I was not a real pro Disney person going in, and then at some point they're like, "It seems like you've drunk the Kool-Aid." I said, "Oh, I've gone in hard." So there's something called Disney Way One, where when they know you're a convert, it's like auditing
Yeah.
Scientology. They're going to really
Yeah.
lock you down. They take you down to the park. You're captive there for a for a week, and then at the end,
Yeah.
you become a friend of a country bear or a friend of Tigger, and you spend your day in the park as a
So you
cosplayer.
did that program. Good. That's a whole level that people don't understand. Um, that's like going through ranger school. So I mean,
Yeah, but a
you,
little different. I would not.
yeah, a
I
little
would not.
different. But in terms
Yeah,
of the stature that it gives you inside Disney after you do that,
I,
that's a big stature thing,
yeah, and I
right?
think that's one thing. When they were finally looking for someone to run the studio of Southeast Asia, I think my name came up because I'd shown that I was committed, and I got
Yeah.
what we were doing at Disney because you needed to be able to understand that what your competitive advantage was because Disney was we're doing Disney branded stuff, and if
Hmm.
you're because branded distribution now you do it a bit more, but it used to be Hollywood was the movie, and Disney is the brand, and it's the guest, and you work with cast members, so yeah, I think that helped.
Hmm. What? So you just picked up these concepts and the marketing piece really on the job through all of these different experiences.
Yeah,
I
and I
mean, because
actually
you,
think that. Well, that's the thing is that actually, oh, for right now, like, so I had to take some training and briefings for him here to Haiti, and like, I won't get into the details, but it's one thing you
yeah,
don't know what you're touching till you hit the ground. Like, there are a few
right,
things here. What I can share,
yeah,
you hear gunfire, the movements, you get a sense, and you won't know till you're here. When a lot of people when they have an education, like, oh, I'm ready for this, and like, you're not. Like West Point is that it didn't give you what you needed to see. It gave you the grounding to learn as you got your through career. I would guess I didn't go through what you all did, but it's almost like the cadet honor code or just understanding like which I did, understanding hierarchy and the need to communicate well.
yeah.
You learn those things when you go to ranger school, when you're training, when you're going through career. I would guess I didn't go through. So it's one thing when I've talked to people about education is that you don't learn to do things. You just get the tools to learn, and then you learn by doing it once you get your job.
Which in a way ties back to the great point you made earlier about success and failure. These experiences humble you because you say, well, I actually don't know everything, so I have to listen. And as a result, we all learn, right? So that's what West Point did for us mutually. And that's what, walking to the elevator with that boss, realizing that with that president and realizing that you were probably not going to get the job until at the very last minute, you start talking about the quality of the movies you've seen, right? So
Yeah.
those kind of things break you open in a way and then allow you to be more humble and to listen and to learn.
Yeah, the humility
Anyway,
because I kind of listen. But the other is that, with the humility, you kind of realize your place in the world and your lack of ability is that, you survive because of other people around you. You can't save yourself, and you can't conquer anything alone. And I think you learn that starting like at West Point. It's the unit,
hmm
and it's like, hey, if we give you a gun and some body armor and a helmet, and you ran out into nowhere by yourself, you're not coming back. you know, uh,
yeah,
and you realize that you don't do anything alone, and that humility
right, right,
will help you. You help your peers, you help your superiors. Like, I did not help Jerry Aranio, and I should have been. And you help those who, you know, work in your unit, and that sense of humility. If, like I said, I at least I got punched in the face pretty early. Like, was it Mike
yeah.
Tyson said, you got to plan until someone punches you in the face. Well, I planned unraveled in '85, but gave me a
Well, eventually we all take a couple of shots. So
we all
I
do.
think we all do. And now you've mentioned Zoe, the not movie star,
Yep,
in the story about Zoe, the movie star. So you have two kids, and
two
what
kids.
rough ages
Yes,
are they now, or
they're
nothing?
15,
Yeah,
13. So I was a bachelor until I was like, I loved my career. I was like in 2008, 2009. I think I was on the road over 200 days a year. I was traveling internationally, different city, different
yeah.
country, and so I didn't get married till very late. And so my kids are young, and they're great. I've got Zoe is now in big in theater arts, doing great at school.
hmm
Sam, she plays guitar, sings. My son Sam plays the bass
Yep.
guitar. He's got a very different uh, attitude. Zoe is very exuberant, and Sam is very self confident.
Okay.
And I think and you're just happy that, for me, I'm not sure if when you see your kids and you realize they've got so many things going for them that you didn't have.
Yeah.
That the, the I when they have the judgment or presence, and so yeah, I've been really fortunate that my kids are in a really good
And
place.
do they call California home in terms of where they spent most of their time?
Not Well, they're bi-coastal. It's California and New Hampshire, so New Hampshire has really still always been home for me, and we'll split our time. So, and
Okay.
they can't call. California is where the larger part of their extended family is, and that's where they're living now, and they'll do high school. But they grew up overseas. I mean, Sam was born in
Yeah.
Singapore. Zoe moved to Singapore when she was one. They just started school in the U.S. for the first time in their lives, and it's an adjustment.
Really? Okay.
But they
So
are,
they've had that international grounding. So that is
yeah, yeah,
amazing.
and we're fortunate for that. But I think
Yeah.
it's good that they're back in the U.S., and they'll be fine.
Yeah. Yeah. They develop a little bit of grounding back there, but they have that base overseas as well. So you achieving success certainly in the entertainment industry. How did the pivot into the State Department work? And I'm sure everybody's trying to connect the beginning of the conversation with that middle part.
Yeah.
Um, how did that shift happen? Because that's probably the most interesting of them all.
Well, the what had happened is that one reason the reason I went for Singapore and went for it hard is that they had a major rift. Like, you learn in the military, the good people get fired
Yeah.
because the wrong place, the wrong time. So just when we had Zoe, my boss, who this guy Daniel Snicki, was a phenomenal, well-educated, well-liked person, was riffed from Disney. And I told Connie, I said, sooner or later, it's me. You get older, you get more expensive. You're going to go.
Mhm.
Unless you're going to be chairman of the studio, your shelf date will hit. And I said, and since we had younger kids, I said, I'm fighting this. We need to stay ahead of it. And one way is to go internationally. And then the thing is, once you go out of the States, and a lot of countries say, unless there's a structured place like Procter and Gamble might do it, Disney doesn't. There's no reentry plan. So I was just looking at the next
Mhm.
steps, and so I told her, look, we'll probably move on at some point. I'm going to run this out as far as I can. And one thing that happened was when when the U.S. ambassador to Singapore came to town, they brought in all the business execs, and I was in the receiving line. And it was Kirk Vager, this is, you know, Christopher Marsh. He's the he's the general manager of Walt Disney Studios for Southeast Asia. He said, "Oh, I want to talk to you." And I'm like, I couldn't figure out what does he want to talk to me about. And it came up. He took me out to lunch, and then he was looking for money for the 4th of July. They raise money. They have sponsors. So I told him
Yeah.
quite candidly, Disney doesn't do this. We're not going to give you money. But what are you trying to do? And they said they got an entertainment event. I said, well, we do that. So I brought Mickey Mouse down for the Hong Kong Disneyland for their party, and I partnered with Harley Davidson. We did a Captain America photo booth, and then when I was talking to their public diplomacy people, they said, "Have you ever thought of working at Department of State?" I'm like, "No." They said, "Look, I talked to you guys like 40 years ago.
Yeah. Right.
My history then,
40 years ago.
crime, and other things."
You thought me being a headlock on TV wasn't appropriate.
Right. And I said, and you guys had decided I wasn't appropriate. And he said, "Look, how long ago was that? Like almost 40 years, 35 years ago."
Yeah.
Like, I think enough time's gone by. I didn't think much about it, but I was worried because I was like, I've got to get through to retirement. And then what happened? I was taking out I was asked by the embassy to take their assistant regional security officer, who was working on cyber, to meet some of the cyber security people in different companies. So I introduced the one at Disney.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, I just took them out to lunch, and I said, how do you live here in Singapore? I said, I just picked you up. I've seen where you live. I know your rent. You're paying 10 to 12 grand a month there. And then you got 2 kids, so they go to Singapore American School. I said, so you're talking what? About 150 grand pre-tax, and then for your housing, and then for school about the same. So you're almost $250,000 in before you even start surviving it. You can't be paid that much. He's like, I don't. I go, how do you do it? He goes, I don't pay for that. And I run me through this because when you're in Department of State.
Yeah.
So I went home and told my wife, said, I think I've got an option. I think we go to Department of State, we take a huge pay cut, and we keep the kids who go to school.
You have all these other benefits, amenities that offset.
But then what happened was that I got World Wrestling Entertainment came calling. A friend of mine, we used to run these joint ventures with Sony Pictures with Disney in the Southeast Asia. My partner came to me and said, "Look, I know that you're going to think that you're leaving at some point. You seem to like professional wrestling. You go to this. You and your wife go on these date nights to local independent wrestling, which is kind of weird.
Right.
They're looking for someone. So I went and did that, and I did that for 5 years. And I thought I was going to do it for a bit longer. And it wasn't until, the problem with challenge.
What were you doing for them, though?
So that was that was managing the events around Asia. So we had 3 or 4 events.
Managing worldwide wrestling events in Asia.
Right. So like one of the first things, so I took Hulk Hogan came down to Melbourne. So I hosted him there for about a week, and that was, that was interesting. That was great. So I had a lot of talks with Hulk. And just that happened is when his life kind of unraveled, and we had to.
Yeah, he hit a bit of the windshield there. Yeah,
it was just before the rough spot. So it was booking large wrestling events around Asia. We went into China. We were doing a few in Tokyo each year. I was able to expand into Osaka, and then we did a large event. It was about 77,000 people at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. So it was the largest international wrestling event that WWE had ever done, and things were going well. And I thought, but I was not self-aware. I thought my family was great. I was great. We're loving Singapore, and came home, and my kid, Sam, had opened the door. I think Sam was about 6 then. I don't know, and just looked at me and walked away. And so I'm going after, and I opened the door to his room and said, "What's going on?" And he says, "Dad, it's mean to my life. When you travel for work, it's mean to my life." And that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And So I told my wife at that point, I said, I'm on the do not call list. I had already passed the test for the Department of State, and I wasn't really going forward with it. I said, I'm going to call Washington and tell them I'm ready. I we've got to move
Yeah.
now. And then what happened? I took a friend out to a local wrestling match, and we were out having beers. He was a guy I played ice hockey with, and I was loving it. And I just told him, I'm not ready. I really want more of this. But that night, I got the email from state. You need to show it now or never. And I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
it was good because it stopped me from backing out of that commitment. And
Backing it back, getting back into the.
so that's how I ended up where I am now. Was
Well, getting 77,000 people to watch wrestling in Melbourne could have an enjoyment all its own, and you could really have a pretty good time doing that stuff. I did
well,
international live events for Ticketmaster, so I know of what you speak. And yeah, it's a hard lifestyle to give up.
yeah, but
You know?
what you finally realize is because that's how, you got to go. You've got to get time alone with your kids or time alone.
Yeah,
Like for me, it would be sitting on the dock in New Hampshire because when you get sucked into it, it Phil Kent had said you got to be able to walk away from anything, including your job, and you kind of
yeah,
lose perspective because it's so good. And if you could just take that breath, which is sitting on the dock in New Hampshire, like, no, this is what I've always loved, and I've missed this. Or when you're on the road, your things are going, and then your kid says, "Dad, I haven't seen you for like a week, and
yeah,
you know, doesn't make me feel good."
yeah,
So
yeah.
those moments are important.
So, what was it the State Department saw? Do you think, or that you can say that because it's an unusual thing? I think that your stage of your career for the State Department to say, "Oh, you seem interesting. Come work for us."
I don't know if they had a choice. I just took the test, I passed it, and next thing I know, they're
So you were
so
taking the test, and okay, got it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and you got to pass the test, and you pass the
Okay.
orals, and at that point, you're on a
Okay.
list,
So
and they don't.
you'd gone through a process with them already. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they don't know really what they're getting until you arrive, and at that point, you figure
And
it
what
out.
languages do you speak? Just you surpass the oral.
Supposedly, I speak French, but I really don't. I tested out in French, for
Hmm.
writing and for reading, but during my tour in Montreal, it was clear my French really wasn't that great. And then
Yeah.
where it doesn't help here is that is it's mostly Creole, and when I've been
Yeah.
presented with Creole, I can't get it. But one thing I will say, so our classmate Henry Worcester, the Ambassador Worcester,
Hmm.
uh, I was with him today, and we were looking at some art, and he was negotiating. He's speaking French. I'm like, oh, I cannot do that. That's why he's the ambassador. He's a
That's
very
right.
capable.
He's the ambassador.
I'm the guy who stands behind him. It doesn't say a word because if I were to try to say anything, and the only words I say here are like, it's like messy, which is, merci. It's the thank you in Creole. So supposedly I speak
Yeah. Yeah.
French,
Yeah.
but I really don't.
Okay. But that's part of the portfolio.
Right?
And how long have you been with the State Department now?
Uh, so now it's been coming on 7 years. So I'll retire in about a year and a half. I'll probably, hopefully
Okay.
I'll get to finish my career here in 80 because that's why I chose this. This is where, and part of it was, and it really is all of you that, like even Ambassador Worcester served in the Army. I never went back and did it. I never had that moment. And so for me, the service to country was important. And then when I finally realized I'd done these kind of easy posts, I'm like, if my family's going to go home and get settled, I asked specifically. I wanted to come here at 80, and after I retired, there's a way to continue to work for state. So I'm hopefully that might happen. But like we were talking about, I won't know till I get there. I might just decide,
Yeah.
no, I'm going to sit on the porch in the dock in New Hampshire, and I'm good. But
But when all is said and done, you will have given a number of years service to the country that is similar to many of us. So I think in the end, though your path was circuitous, starting with a Navy uniform all those years ago, you will
right,
have ended up serving the nation as a classmate, right?
right,
So
right.
there you go.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm fortunate. I think of that.
Yeah, and you
Yeah,
you your path never routine or average, but the path nonetheless, and so you are a classmate in that way, right? So
yeah.
that's great.
And The big thing on that is, I really had a friend. I was having some regrets. I think a couple of years ago, I told a friend that, I should have done this or that, and he had me read this book called Midnight Library. And if you ever read it, it's someone you get into this, you sucked in this book in the library, and you relive the life you make different decisions, and it's like sliding
Right.
doors. You think they all work out because
Yeah.
in your mind they always do, and they don't.
Right.
And then you realize, whatever life I've got, it probably got me to where I needed to be. And when you're looking at your kids, you're like, they wouldn't be here if a number of things, miraculous
Yeah.
number of turns hadn't happened. And the friends
Right.
I met, from friends at West Point and other places, I would not have met them unless I'd flown through life in the sequence that I did. So I've been pretty happy with it,
Yeah.
I have to say.
Well, the good news and the positive part of West Point and the West Point graduate community, and then the class of '86, is that you still have all those friends from West Point. So you get the benefit of still having everywhere from George and the G1 gang all the way out to the rest of us. So, and that this is a stage of life where we're reactivating that because many of us also busy like yourself. So it's great.
Yeah.
Is there any story we haven't covered in your very eventful life?
There are too many, but I don't know if we've got time. If we could do another. Tell you where we'll probably share them is that the great thing about this is why I love the class of '86. I'll be there at the 40th. George called me up for
That's
G1.
great.
We haven't lost anybody since John Todd. We're like, look, as long as we're alive, we don't know who will be there for the 50th. We've got to be there.
That's great.
I'll be there at the 40th. I'll be telling lots of stories.
Great.
I'll be listening to everybody else's stories. It's going to be a great time.
Excellent. Well, we're delighted that you're going to be there. And George and the G1 crew are also very heavily concentrated in Huntsville, Alabama, and they get together. So no doubt we'll run across each other as we go.
Right.
Marshy, was terrific having you on. I really enjoyed hearing the stories, and what a life and what a career and what a guy. So we're glad to have you on, and we look forward to seeing you in November.
Paul, thanks. Thanks a lot. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe button. With over 900 living graduates, we have a lot of stories to tell, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.